This is the logo demo part 2 on deconstruction. What I'd like for us to do first is go to Illustrator. And you can find it in your applications, or if it's on your toolbar, or if it's on your desktop. We're going to double click on it. And if you're on a Mac, I'd like for you to hit Command Option Control Shift. And if you're on a PC, I'd like for you to hit Control Alt Shift. Once it's open, I'd like for you to open the file from Canvas. It should be called Demo2 PDF. Once we're in Illustrator, I'd like for us to go to the top here and change our workspace to typography. Now, the first thing that we should have done for homework is we should have figured out our two typefaces. And I isolated my two typefaces to Futura and Baskerville. And the next step we're going to do is we're going to experiment with mixing weight, letter spacing, lowercase and capitals, and mixing the typefaces. I don't want these to look like ransom notes. So the first step we're going to do to mix these two, I've chosen what I consider my top choices for this logo design from these lists. So the first step we're going to do is we're going to grab our type tool. Because you've chosen your typography workspace, we can use this type tool at the top to change the point size, to change the typeface, to change if it's bold or not, all those things. You can also change it up here on the toolbar as well. So let's kind of mix these things, and you can just watch and see how I do these and just follow along. I'm not going to narrate it. I'm going to try to move fast so you can see how these are done. After we're done with part 2, figuring out the interletter spacing, intermixing the typefaces, we'll go to part 3. In part 3, what we're going to do is we're going to take the results from part 1 and 2, and we're going to mask out or remove parts of the letter forms. The word must retain its legibility. So I'm going to grab my favorites from part 2 and hit my Option key and select my favorites. And I'm going to duplicate them. You can also use copy and paste. And I will grab that one. And I'm going to grab, let's see, that one. And And I'm going to shuffle them a little bit so we can organize them accordingly. So once I'm here, I'm going to start with my first one. I'm going to zoom in, and we are going to use our rectangle tool to block out parts of the letter forms. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my rectangle tool and make sure that your KindMind is deselected, and we're going to go over to our color tab here, and we're going to grab our white color, and what we're going to do is we're going to drag out areas where we want to block out. For this one, I just want to block out the bottom of the word, but I want it to still be legible. I might use my arrow key to kind of get it so that we still see that it goes to the D. That's my first block out. You can block out more, whatever fits the typeface experiment. The next one I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of my original experiments and block out from parts of my initial experiments. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my K here, and I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to paste it. And what I'd like for us to do over here, we'll zoom back in. Remember, you can hit Command plus or minus, or Command equals to, or Control equals if you're on a PC. And I'm going to change the fill to white. So I have my white tab under here, under color. You can also use it as default and then change your stroke to nothing. But once I have this here, you can't see it because it's white on white, but if I click with my black arrow tool, you can see what's there. What I'd like to do is I'd like to divide this into small parts. So the first step we would do is to grab our eraser tool. I'm going to make my eraser tool smaller by hitting my left bracket tool. And I'll just kind of take apart this version, maybe make little parts that I might use. And just kind of erase the rest of it. And for this part, this bottom part, I'm going to use my right bracket tool, and I'm going to just delete all of this. So I have these like 3 little parts. So I'm going to grab my black arrow tool. Now I need to ungroup these, by the way, before I start moving them. I'm going to ungroup them. And so now I should be able to grab each little part, and I can start holding my shift key, and I'm just going to add like a little bit of a block out on the right side of the main stroke. And then I'm going to grab maybe this one right here. Oops. And then I'm going to rotate it downward. I'm going to do the same thing where I make it a little smaller, and I'm going to block out a little bit of that bottom side, and I'm going to pull it in a little bit. So that's what my block out is there. And then I'm going to block out the end of the word. So I'm going to rotate it, and I might just kind of have it creep in a little bit. So, and maybe I'll kind of come in right at the bottom. And we want it to be legible, so I might pull down parts to make it a little bit more legible. Still need to see that it's there, but we still want to block out parts of it. And maybe moving some of that there. All right, that's good and finished. Now let's go down to our bottom, and let's block out the top. Now for this one, what I'd like to do is I'd like to knock off the serif, and I'd like to knock off the top of these points on Futura. So the first step I'm going to do is I'm going to create outlines. And when you create outlines, just know that we can't make the inner letter spacing or alter the inner letter spacing mechanically any longer. We would have to do it manually. So if you want to work with your mechanical letter spacing by using your character tool and changing your kerning here, or changing your interletter spacing or tracking here, we can't use that once we create outlines. So for example, if we go down here and I want to track that out, I can, make it much larger, the space. But now that I've created outlines, I can't do that. What I want to do first is I want to ungroup it, and I want to drag out our K so that the serif reaches above and below the baseline and above the cap line. When I grab out my white rectangle, which I'm going to go over here and change it to a white tool, and I grab out that white rectangle, and I want to knock off that top part of that. You can see that it's affecting the parts that I want it to affect. Once I'm done with that, I can select all of my type with my marquee tool. Then I can go to my Pathfinder tool over here, and I can use my divide tool. And when I use my divide tool, you'll notice that it breaks it into these like little parts. If I click out into open space or deselect hitting Command-Shift-A, I can go back and I can delete these parts. Now again, we want to ungroup, and now I should be able to grab those little parts. And there's going to be little parts on the top of the M and on the bottom of the N. And it looks like I got that one. Got a couple more to go. And now when I select this, I should have the total word form looking more like a logo. All right, let's do our last one. On this bottom one, I want the ascender of the D to meet the cap line. So I'm going to make a static cap line. And to do so, I'm going to, first off, I'm going to bring my ruler guides down. If you don't have your ruler guides, you hit Command R to turn them on and off. So the next step we're going to do is we're going to pull down a ruler guide to make sure that we make a static cap line. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring a ruler guide to the baseline and the cap line so everything stays static. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to make mind a little bigger. So I'm going to use my character tool over to the right, and I'm going to make it 54 points. And once we're about there, then I can use my rectangle tool, and again I'm going to deselect. You can hit an open space with your black arrow tool, or you can go to select and deselect, or hit Command-Shift-A. And once we're done, we're going to grab our rectangle tool, make sure it's white with no stroke. So we're going to put none in the stroke. And then I'm going to grab my rectangle tool and pull it out where I want to affect the logo. Once we're done doing that, I'll select the type, I'll right click, create outlines, and I will try to take away those parts from the top. And again, what we're going to do is we're going to go to our Pathfinder tool, we'll go to divide, and once it's divided, we can ungroup, and we can delete these little parts that are right there. So now when I select my logo, we can see it's all one united thing. And we can regroup it if we'd like to, and you can just go to Object and Group or Command G. So now it's just one thing that we can move around. The next thing we're going to work on is the B step of part 3. If we look at this, we're going to combine type families and weights within individual characters. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab some of my experiments up at the top here, and let me grab my black arrow key, and I'm going to combine maybe this one with this one. Maybe I'll just do one character and then show you how to join them together. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pull up the bottom logo that is just Futura, and we're going to try to align them as best as possible. I'm going to use my character tool to interject letter spacing, or interletter spacing, and I will add some tracking. Maybe a little bit more, maybe we'll do about 25. Let's see if these line up fairly well. I'm going to insert 20 points here. Once we get them to line up, we can continue. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate these so I can show you my second experiment. But before we get going to divide these, I'm going to use my eraser tool. And before we use our eraser tool, I'd like for us to create outlines on these. And I'm going to decrease my eraser tool by using my left bracket tool. I'm going to use my shift key and I'm going to go across and just divide this word up. Now again, we have to ungroup these to pull them apart. So you can hit right click and ungroup, or we can go to object and ungroup right here. And I'm going to right click and create outlines. Again, if you're not one of the people who likes using the right click tool, you can always go to type and hit create outlines there. Or you can hit Command Shift O if you're a command key person. And I'm going to divide this up. And I'm going to hold my shift key and click and drag across. And I'm going to right click and ungroup them as well. Alright, so now my goal is to intermix the typefaces. Now we can intermix weights as well. But I'm just going to take apart my word and I'm going to try to join them together and see how they look. Kind of Frankenstein these things together and see what we get. Now if they don't line up perfectly, the wonderful thing is now that they are separate, we can kind of individually align them. So I can kind of move them over to where they need to be. And it's going to look kind of funky, but we're going to see if any of this is useful for our final. And so there's our first one, and then we'll do our second one by grabbing the bottom part and glue them together and see what kind of weirdness we get. Now, you know, this is maybe something we will or will not use. We might find some interesting things happening among one character, for example. I think that some of this stuff that's happening in the K is interesting. So maybe that's where we affect it. First thing we're going to do is we're going to select this bottom one here. And what I'd like for us to do is create outlines. And once we have outlines created, we're going to ungroup it, right click and ungroup it, and then we are going to drag out and delete on our keyboard the K. On this one, what I'd like for us to do is drag out or copy and paste these letter forms. Now we can see how this could be possibly useful. Now, once I get my second K on there, I'm going to do the same thing to this one. Create outlines. Then I'm going to ungroup. And then I'm going to take my K and I'm going to delete that one as well. And maybe I'll take this K this time. And maybe on this one, I will make it a little larger so that it meets the cap line. So we have something that looks, and I'll pull it in a little bit. So they look a little bit more interesting. So once we have these versions of the chopped up letter forms, what I'd like for us to do is to join them using our Pathfinder tool. So once we do that, we're going to select the individual letter form. We're going to go to our Pathfinder and we're going to unite. Same with the bottom one. We're going to drag a marquee out and we're going to unite. What I'd like for us to do next is to kind of inspect these and go in and make sure that they look completely united. For example, I see some anchor points here that could be adjusted. For example, let's zoom in even further and we might be able to delete some of these anchor points. So everybody's seeing that. So now that side, all I did was grab that anchor point and hit the delete on the keyboard, and now it's looking a little cleaner. And when we go up to this one, we see this kind of mess in here, and we'd like to clean that up as well. So we're going to zoom in here, and maybe I delete this point on the outside, and now it is looking pretty good. And I don't know if that path is still there. It looks like it deleted the path, so I'm going to grab my pen tool and just make sure that these anchor points are touching each other. So maybe next what I'll do is I'll get rid of some of this information in here. I kind of like the double leg thing happening here. It looks kind of interesting. So once that's done, that looks pretty good. Now if you're like, I hate this shape right here, you could always take that path, grab that point, just the individual point, and pull it in. And we might, you know, hold it right there and, you know, make it a little bit more streamlined. And maybe you would actually delete this point right here so everything looks pretty organized. So those are my chop up experiments to complete part B of number 3. So for part 4, what we're going to do is we're going to use the thumbnails, and we're going to use our original imagery from our first experiments, and we're going to combine them with some of our word experiments from above, from 1, 2, and 3. And so the first thing I'd like for us to do is to go up to our first experiments and grab some parts that we'd like to include. So I'm going to grab, with my white arrow key, I'm going to grab my K here. I'm going to select it again with my black arrow key, and then I'm going to copy and I'm going to paste it down here. And I'm going to drag it out and make it a K for my beginning of kind mind. And the second thing I'm going to do is grab some of these little parts that I think might be interesting. For example, I might want that I, and I'm going to copy and again and paste it down here. And maybe I'll make it happen up here. So I'm going to grab this little flourish right here, and I'm going to zoom in and grab this top one right here, and I will copy and paste it down again in my bottom artboard. So I have those little parts, and then I'm going to grab one of my citruses. Now I'm going to let you guys know that this one is a bitmap photo right here, and this is a live trace, and you can kind of see the difference. I'm going to want to recolor them. I can tell you that a live trace is much harder to recolor. For example, if I go to fill it with a color, you're going to see that it's much harder. So that's something that you would have to address individually. For example, if I want these parts to be white, etc., you're going to have to take it apart and figure out which parts with your little white arrow tool, is that going to be pink. Is everybody kind of understanding that? So it's a little more tedious to make this a color. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my bitmap, because I can just turn it into a color and it will allow me to work with it. So I'm going to copy and paste it down to the bottom here, and I will have that ready and available to myself. The next thing I'm going to do is from my second experiment, I like how this dark K from this Baskerville looks with this tracked out sans serif Futura. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my black arrow key, I'm going to copy it and paste it, and I'm going to paste it down here, and I'm going to combine it with this K. I'm going to grab my type tool and delete that big K, and so I'm going to replace it with this even bigger K. But for this experiment, what I'd like for us to do is take our ruler tool, and I'm going to drag it down from the top, and I'm going to pull it to what would be the X height on this big K. So this is the cap line, this is the baseline, this is the X height. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it reach the cap line of the smaller letters to reach the X height. So something like this. And I'm going to throw a baseline down here so that we can kind of make this align to a point. And so that's one of my first experiments. And I might make this a little larger, this flourish. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to rotate it a little bit, and I'm going to make it kind of come out of this D, just as like a decorative element. So that's kind of my first experiment. The second one I'd like to do is to make a similar thing to what's happening here. So I'm going to copy and paste this, and what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to delete this I, and I'm going to add a K to it, and then I'm going to add a space for the I. And that way, when I add it in here, I have a different version of the logo. Now, I notice I don't quite like the way this palm tree looking thing looks. The stroke of it looks a little thinner than what we're seeing here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a stroke to it. Again, on this little decorative element here, or the decorative stroke from our first experiments. Once I have that stroke on it, I want to make it a solid object. And I don't know if everybody remembers how to do that, but we can go to Object and go to Path, and we can go Outline Stroke. And once we've outlined the stroke, then we can go to our Pathfinder tool and Unite, and then it becomes even a bigger or wider path. And I even might make it a little wider by just kind of dragging it out. So that's looking a little bit more like how I'd want this to look in coordination with the letter spacing. And then the final one, I'm going to take this version at the top and I'm going to copy it and paste it at the bottom here. And what I'd like to do for the last one is make the citrus kind of fall inside of this D shape, which is kind of a tricky element that I'd like to add. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in. So I'm going to click on this, and it's still typed on a line here. And what I'd like to do is right click. We're going to create outlines, or you can do it up in your type tool. And then I'm going to ungroup, and you can do that in Object if you're more comfortable doing it up on your toolbar. And then I'm going to copy and paste my D. Now there's two ways that I can take apart this D. I can use my white arrow tool, and I can grab these paths and delete them. Or I can separate them by right-clicking and releasing my compound path so that I have these two individual shapes. Now I want to use the interior, not the exterior, because I want the citrus to fall in the interior of the letter form. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to delete this bottom one, and I'm going to use this one to cut out kind of the citrus shape in the middle. The first thing I'd like for us to do is to take this fill area and convert it to a stroke. And then the next thing I'd like for us to do is to make this stroke a little more visible, because when we put it on top of this black image area, it's going to be a little hard to see. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to make my stroke right here red. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate it so it's in the part of the citrus that I like. And I think I like this kind of more visible area. And I can hold my Shift key and I can drag out that letter form so it stays proper to its original form. And again, I'm going to use some of the lines inside of the citrus. Notice the citrus has linear aspects to it. And so I'm going to line up the D to that area. So everybody kind of seeing that. And then once we have this, I want us to select both the photograph and this shape here. And I'm going to cut it out. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to select a marquee around both of them. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Object and to go Clipping Mask and Make. Now, you can hit Command 7. That's really the best way to do it, is to always hit Command 7, which is to make a clipping mask. Now we're going to rotate it, and we can place it right next to this deform, or in place of the deform. So if I want to delete that, I could put this right in its place. And that's kind of what we're looking at there. Not the best iconic logo. I'm just doing some experiments here. The last thing I wanted to do was to put this shape inside of this deform. So I might do that on this experiment up here. So I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to paste it up here, and I might put this inside of that deform. And let's zoom it in and try to line it up as precisely as possible. And we can kind of hold our Shift key and hold your Shift key, and we want to drag it out a little bit, and then maybe we can use our arrow key to kind of hold your Shift key, and there we go. Once it's in there, what we can do is we can start thinking about color. Now, color is interesting for this project. I am making a restriction for you guys to only use 2 colors. We're going to use black, which I'm assigning you a color. You don't have to use black. You can all use 1 color if you'd like. And then we're going to use 1 Pantone color. If you don't have your swatches open, what you can do is go to Swatches here, and we're going to go to this drop-down menu off to the side and go to Open Swatch Library, and we will go to Color Books, and I'd like for us to go to Solid Uncoated Pantone. Once we have that, what you can do is you can choose a myriad of colors. I kind of like this citrusy pink color right here. And I'm going to grab it. And what it will do is when you click on it, it will throw it into your swatch panel. You can also, click and drag, and that will throw it into your swatch panel as well. And then I can also throw this Pantone panel onto my toolbar, as you can see. So I can play with those as well. But now that it's in my swatch panel here, I can use those spot colors as suggested. Now I've already made this gray color a spot tone, and I will show you how to make a custom spot tone. A spot tone basically allows us, just like the Pantone, to have these tints throughout. So if, let's say, we're doing a FedEx logo, or let's say UPS has only yellow and brown, and the yellow on their logo has a gradient. And if they want to create a gradient, they can use these intermediary tints. So this is a way for corporations to get away with having a more complex design with less color, which less color means less money to print with. So if they print in full color, which is CMYK, they have 2 extra plates to print in, which means more money for the corporation to spend on mass production of packaging, which is what we want to avoid. So that's why this is going to be a 2-color logo. It's very in line with the way a lot of corporations make logos to save money. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to color little parts of our logo. For example, this D, what I can do is I can select this pink color. And I've only selected on my line, but I want to throw it into my shape there. And I don't want the shape to have a line, so it would look something like that. And likewise, I could do it with the fill on this little design right here. So we have Kind Mind right there. Same with the interior of this, we can fill it. So different ways to incorporate color. So for our final, these are some of my final drawings that I'd like to replicate. This is a serif typeface that I want to incorporate this kind of flourish inside of that from my original experiments. It looks kind of like a palm tree or a little plant piece. And so we're going to regenerate this at the bottom here. I've already kind of recreated one of these, and I'm going to recreate a second one. What I'm going to do is I'm going to type out Kind Mind, K-I-N-D, hit Command-Shift-A to deselect, and hit Mind, and Command-Shift-A to deselect. I'm going to drag a marquee out, and once we're done grabbing the marquee, I'm going to go to Baskerville. And once I have Baskerville, I'm going to choose the type, which is semi-bold, which fits it best. And then for this design, I have it where the D kind of hooks around the other D. Are we seeing that, where the N kind of stair steps? And the flourish will come in on these eyes. Now what I want to do first is delete the eyes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here, I'm going to delete that eye, and I'm going to add some space. Now you can add or subtract any interletter spacing to make it look a little bit more legible, whatever is up to you. So the first thing I'd like for us to do is to recolor these. And like I told you, you can only use black or the tints of black, or you can use a color in the tints of the color. For example, let's say I want to make Mind that pink, but let's say I want to make it that pink, but maybe I want it to be a tint of that pink. So we'll choose, something like that. Likewise, on the black, if we choose a black color, I want us to have the option of choosing any of these gray tones. The difference is that once we have the gray tone that we want, I want us to be able to make it a spot color. So once we want to make it a spot color, and I have the gray, the just right gray that I want. I think that looks pretty good. What I'll do is I will drag it into my toolbar right here, and I will double click on it. And notice it says process color. Process color means that it's printing a certain amount of gray tone. Right here, you see that says K, that stands for black. And what we want to do is we want to make it a spot color. So if we want to overlap colors, for example, if you want to overlap the gray and the pink, that it will actually be a spot color. So we're going to go to spot color, and I'm going to hit OK. So now when I go to these gray tones, I have them readily available. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my swatches again, and I'm going to make kind the same two colors. Now you could obviously pick a Pantone as well. I'm just showing you how to customize a spot color. And what a printer would do is they would try to make a color based on the spot color that you generated. So the next step we're going to do is, I noticed that these words are a little far apart and I might need a little bit more space for my eye. So I'm going to move this in, and I'm going to mess with my interletter spacing a little bit here on kind. I'm going to move it in just a little bit, make this -10. There we go. Maybe make this, put a little bit of space in between the I and the N. And so what we'll do is we'll just add a little bit of space, maybe make it 50 so that it pushes it over, and maybe we'll push these over just a little bit as well. So I have that nice interlock right there, and again, I can kind of manually do some of this as well. So once I've done that, now I'm going to grab my flourish from the other side that I enjoy, and I'm going to copy, I'm going to paste it, and again, this is in a Pantone, so it should be fine, and I'm going to make it smaller so that it fits this design. And so one thing I noticed is that I don't like the width of the stroke, so I might make it a little wider right here, a little wider in its shape. And then what I can do is, where it's getting a little bigger right here, I can take my points over here and zoom in. I'll hold grab these paths, these points. I'm going to grab these points and I'm going to move them in so that it is a little bit more congruent with the shape. All right. So that is one of my final designs. So these are some of the experiments that I'd like for you to do. Remember that you can only use two colors, black and a Pantone color. Remember that if you use a black, that it has to be a spot color. So it's up to you what you use, and good luck. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me.